Welcome to Global Focus. I'm Patrick Ryan from the Tennessee World Affairs Council. Today we will talk with a distinguished panel of international affairs specialists about current global issues and America's place in the world. In the middle of a week rich with major developments around the world. What better backdrop could there be for our conversation today than the United Nations Week in New York? And as our live audience knows, President Obama just spoke at the UN General Assembly. Also, the expanded U.S.-led campaign in Iraq and Syria, and the startling news from the CDC yesterday that as many as 1.4 million people across Africa could be infected with Ebola by January. Clearly, what is happening around the world requires American citizens' knowledge and participation. We hope to bring some clarity to these developments today. Today, we're continuing our Global Focus program sponsored by the Tennessee World Affairs Council, and it's a program that will connect you with decision makers and thought leaders from a wide-ranging spectrum of geographical areas, topical specialties, and professional disciplines. A few housekeeping notes before I introduce our special guests today. The Tennessee World Affairs Council, or as we call it, TNWAC, is one of the 100 similar organizations around the United States that form a grassroots network of nonprofit educational groups devoted to improving the understanding of our citizenry on the important topics in global affairs. These all fall under the umbrella of the World Affairs Councils of America, with its offices in Washington, D.C. We're independent, locally chartered, and we pledge not to advance any particular political agenda other than producing programs and delivering resources to educate the public on the world in the broadest sense of the meaning. As a nonprofit organization, we welcome your support. It is the only way we continue our important work. You can visit www.tnwac.org to learn more about becoming a member or making a contribution to our efforts. Today, I'd like to thank Dr. Sam Glasgow of Cookeville, Tennessee, and family for a generous donation to the Council that has made the Global Focus program of the Tennessee World Affairs Council possible, that being this webcast series. I'd also like to acknowledge Belmont University, which hosts the offices of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. Now, on to our program. With us today is Ambassador Dick Bowers, who served a career as a diplomat in the United States Foreign Service starting in 1967. He has served America in posts around the world, including Panama, Poland, Singapore, and Germany, and he was the UN Ambassador to Bolivia from 1991 to 1994. Ambassador Bowers also served in important leadership positions at the State Department in Washington. He is a member of the TNWAC board and also serves in leader positions in Rotary, including recently as governor for the Rotary District that includes about half of the state of Tennessee. Like Ambassador Bowers, Susan Haynes is a member of the TNWAC board. She's an adjunct professor at Bethel University in Nashville and a doctoral candidate at George Mason University, where, as I understand it, this Friday she will complete the long and arduous path to being named Dr. Haynes. We congratulate her in advance on that, and welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
Angela Weck is a veteran of World Affairs Councils at the local level in her hometown of Peoria, Illinois, and for the nationwide network of World Affairs Council, having served on the national board. She teaches at Bradley University, including in the area of Russian studies, specifically Russian foreign policy, a field that many Americans may have thought was passé until the rise of Putinism. So we welcome Angela to our panel to help round out our conversation of America and the world. Lastly, let me again welcome our audience. We appreciate everyone who is dialed in today, and we look forward to your questions. You can enter your questions through the control panel, and please start collecting your thoughts on what inquiries you want to put to our distinguished panel today. Let's open our conversation with Ambassador Dick Bowers, who we will count on today to give us insights on U.S. foreign policy from the perspective of Foggy Bottom, the U.S. State Department. Dick, can you describe the landscape that Washington, the diplomatic view, sees when they look at the complexity of international developments? One would assume the decision makers are consumed by the many crises at hand, much less able to focus on mid and long-term issues.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks, Pat. I think if I were sitting in Washington right now, I would see a very complex, challenging, and dangerous landscape. I've been involved in foreign affairs for over 50 years, and I don't think I've ever seen the world as potentially hostile to the United States as it is now. And I say that, just quickly, let me run around the world. If you go to Latin America, you've got a big powerhouse down in Argentina that is about to default. You've got a Brazil that is trying to figure out where it's going and what to do and who to elect and how to make all that happen. Venezuela is certainly not our friend, and they are about to assume a position on the UN Security Council. If you go to Asia, China is indeed rising and is projecting its power in ways that it has not done in centuries. And the East China, South China Sea issues involving Vietnam, China, Malaysia, Philippines, all have the potential to drag us into conflict and difficulty. The Middle East, of which you're the expert, Pat, you go from Libya all the way east, and it's one problem after another, with the tiny exception maybe of Tunisia that seems to be getting it together. We have been involved in that area for decades and continue to be, and the threat from the Islamic State, the failed states in Syria and Iraq, pose extreme dangers to us, and
muted.
The President has spoken to these issues, and I think we're going to be engaged in them for quite some time. Europe has, I think Angela will talk more specifically about Ukraine and Russia. Russia is doing things that have not been done in Europe since the beginning of the Second World War, annexing territory and projecting its power and basically pushing its weight around with neighbors that it sees as being part of its satrapy, and changing the political landscape. The United States is heavily involved. NATO is we have a commitment through NATO in the Article 5 to protect. Attack against one is an attack against all. And Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, all are NATO members, and all are looking to NATO and to us to make sure that the Russian bear doesn't come prowling around their doorsteps. So it is a difficult world. Africa, the Ebola crisis is going to take us down some new ways of how we engage in the world. We are but a plane ride away from having Ebola arrive in Nashville, Tennessee. And I think American people need to realize that this world is increasingly complex and interactive. I think, as the President said in his, I believe it's speech at West Point, we cannot do it alone. The United States has to lead because there's nobody else that can lead the way we do. But at the same time, we cannot do it alone. We cannot be out there trying to be the world's policeman. We can be the big guy on the team, but we need that team. So with that, let me throw it back to you, Patrick.
Dick, that's an excellent opening statement of where we are in the world. One of the things that we want to cover today is not just the crises that envelop the world, but America's role in the world. And the United States has been at war for 13 years and is in what a recent study by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs calls the age of retrenchment. And some people see this as kind of a myth that we're reverting to a certain level of isolationism. But is the United States entering a new period in the foreign affairs cycle where, having spent the last decade and spending blood and treasure abroad, make Americans gun-shy to exercise the leadership in the world that's required? What does the age of retrenchment mean for American interests abroad?
Well, my view is that we cannot retrench. We live in a world that is so interconnected and so interoperative and so globally enmeshed that there's no place for us to go. And although in the minds of some Americans we ought to retrench, that's just not going to happen. It can't happen. As I said earlier, we can't go alone. There are problems out there. I didn't even mention global warming, for example, which requires a coordinated international effort. The European Union has just dodged a bullet, for example, with the possible secession from the UK of Scotland. The euro is under attack in some places. Where we get our trade, our economy, the United States simply cannot build up its borders and hunker down. We have got to be part of that team I mentioned. The United Nations is one way to do that, but these are all imperfect institutions, and I think when you look at what's going on in the world, some of the cardinal principles of American foreign policy are under attack. We are a democracy, and we continue to believe in democracy, but there are a number of voices out there that say, well, democracy really doesn't work. And they point to the United States and the frozen kind of activities going on Capitol Hill and the inability to do what is good for the country because of partisan political gerrymandering issues. I think we got problems. So retrenchment is not on my radar screen, and I don't think for the American people it is either. And we are war-weary, and we're tired of being involved, but I don't think we have any other choice but to stay involved.
Well, we certainly do have a laundry list of problem areas, and we're going to talk with Angela Weck about one of those, being the situation with Russia and the Ukraine, her specialty. We'll drill down to that a little bit more. But Angela, again, welcome to Global Focus from Peoria, and I'm sure you'll tell us what they think in Peoria about all these issues. But first, if we can examine our major topic today, America and the world, can you talk a little bit about the thematic shifts in global affairs? You know, political scientists track ups and downs in engagement and retrenchment and multipolar and unipolar and bipolar and all those sort of relationships between countries and where the United States is. Every day you have to explain these concepts to young men and women in college classes. What three things generally would you want them to know and our audience to know about America and the world from your perspective?
Well, thanks for having me. And we in Peoria are well-read and really smart, so just kidding. But let me share you my views, at least, that I share with my students on U.S. foreign policy. Some broad scope, not necessarily targeting Russia and Ukraine at the moment, but, you know, some broad ideas, as Ambassador Bowers pointed out. The world's a changing place, and the United States has to accept that we cannot direct all the changes. So that time that's passed where we are the only leader in the world, you know, and this isn't just because Obama just talked about this. You know, George H.W. Bush is the one who talked about the changing world order, or the new world order rather. And, you know, so this has been something that's been coming for the last, 30 years, 25 years, and we're a little bit slow to move with it. And we want to maintain our place of prominence, but it's increasingly difficult in a rapidly changing world. And as Ambassador pointed out, we need to be willing to take advantage of the strengths of our global partners and our neighbors and not try to do it alone, because we can't do it all on ourselves. It's too expensive on many levels. Secondly, it's important to remember that foreign policy is domestic policy. We like in this country and think that foreign policy is something that they do out in Congress or by the president. But in fact, what happens in the world affects us locally in terms of the economy, in terms of our own politics, terror threats, health threats. These are all local issues as well as foreign policy issues. But our domestic policies affect how we carry out our foreign policy, and the bitter partisan fighting that we're witnessing now tends to contribute to what looks like a very inconsistent U.S. foreign policy. And that needs to be addressed domestically so that we can, create a uniform or at least something that sounds more popular than what we're doing now. Our Congress will fight about it, the President will announce something, and then they fight about it from a different direction. So that's projecting a perception that our foreign policy is not effective and inconsistent. But the biggest, pro-U.S. foreign policy comment that I make with my students is that we have to remember U.S. strength, America's strength, has always been our ingenuity, our creativity, our entrepreneurship, and those are not going to go away. You know, in spite of criticisms of our system of education, in spite of criticisms of our economy, or what have you, America's position as a world leader is ours to lose, not to be taken over. You know, the position won't be taken over by China or India or somebody else. It's for us to lose, and the way we lose that is to, you know, not focus on our own strengths and emphasize our strengths, and that carries over to a more consistent foreign policy and that sort of thing. So I'm anxious to talk about the challenges with Russia, but I think we should hear from Susan first.
Well, we certainly will. And Susan, thank you for joining us. First, let me remind our audience that they're with the Global Focus Webcast provided by the Tennessee World Affairs Council. We appreciate their attendance, and for the archive audience, thank you for joining us as well. And you can find this and other Global Focus broadcasts at the TNWAC.org website. We turn now to Susan Haynes, who is also a member of the Tennessee World Affairs Council Board. And Susan, we're going to drill down a little bit into U.S.-China relations and what's happening in East Asia. But first, if you want to share with us what you see as some of the ground truths in U.S. foreign policy and America's place in the world as well. The floor is yours.
Certainly. Well, let me, I'm piggybacking upon the ambassador's comments as well as Angela's. You know, I think that, as they had emphasized, a lot of people in the United States want to see the unipolar world order continue, if we even want to call it really a unipolar world order, which is helmed by the United States. And this is in the sea of a myriad of other countries who are really pushing for and accepting a multipolar world order. So I think, as Angela had mentioned, going it alone and forcing that route and thinking that that is sustainable, I think it's not sustainable. And I think that you can still be a leader, as Rama had mentioned even this morning. You can still be a leader of a multipolar world order, and it doesn't have to be a world of hegemony, really. So I think that one of the ground truths that I would say, as Angela had emphasized, is the fact that we do have our own strengths and we can lead in certain areas. And that includes innovation, science, and technology, which is where one of our strongest suits is. And especially in comparison to China, because a lot of people, of course, see China rising, and is that China being our #1 competitor. But really, we have an incredible competitive advantage and comparative advantage in regards to science and technology and innovation. And I think that that's something to emphasize and to hold on to and strengthen and put money and resources and time toward. Also reiterating the ambassador's comments, I think that the sentiment of isolationism is really not the right direction. And while people want to see us pull out of our engagement in other areas of the world, and they see that as contributing to our strength, I would argue the opposite. By pulling back, we are allowing other forces to rise up that would then threaten the United States' security and its position in the world. So if we are to try to go alone, I think that that would actually very much undermine our position, our security, and our stability. So I think that that's one of the fundamental truths, is that increasing engagement and making it strategic engagement and not careless engagement is actually going to increase the United States' position in the world and our position as a leader in the world. And then again, secondly, to focus upon what that engagement is abroad, and then focusing domestically on what we can do to strengthen ourselves. As I don't think anybody has mentioned yet, the incredible deficit of the United States is also something that it can't be ignored, and it's something that certain strategic calculations have been made in order to increase that deficit, and I think other countries are sitting back and thinking, how is this going to be sustained, and how can a leader, especially if you're talking about a financial leader in the world sector, how can we respect this, or how can we expect for the United States to lead in this area, considering the significant international debt and deficit? So I would say that that's some promising notes, but then also some significant challenges that I think that we need to consider going forward.
Thanks, Susan, for that. And Dick, I'm going to turn back to you here in a second. But as the guy on the panel who was given the homework assignment for Middle East affairs, I'm not even quite sure where to begin. We'll drill down some more on that. You know, I like you, Dick, have been a Rotarian and have traveled around to Rotary clubs. And in years past, actually before the Arab Spring, and I won't claim any special insight into global affairs, but I had a presentation that I would do when asked to go speak to Rotary clubs. It was the dozen hotspots in and around the Arabian Peninsula, and it basically was going around the Horn, literally starting in the Horn of Africa and the problems in Africa, across the Persian Gulf, Iran, Iraq, succession. This was during Mubarak's regime, succession in Egypt, the Israel-Palestine problem, what was going on in Sudan, obviously the center of gravity of the Arabian Peninsula in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, secession issues, what's happening there. So it's a pretty complicated place. You don't even know where to start. The problem with ISIS and our current engagement, if you hadn't even considered this, it was a messy place for the Secretary of State to wake up every morning and try to figure out what the to-do list was just in the Middle East, much less American foreign policy around the world. We had a timely presentation last night, and I won't claim that my major source of news is Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, but I know there are a lot of people who get their news that way, and obviously it's a satirical take on the news, but occasionally they do have some serious conversations. And last night, General Anthony Zinni, who had been the Commander-in-Chief at U.S. Central Command, and full disclosure here, I was a serving U.S. Navy officer at Central Command when he was the boss, so I have a special appreciation for his insights. He was the guy who in the mid-90s took a look around the Middle East and noticed that Saddam Hussein at some point would be out of the picture. So he had his staff at CENTCOM develop plans that would shape the U.S. response to a post-Saddam Middle East and Iraq, and sadly not very many of those plans were picked up after 2003. When the Saddam statue fell in Baghdad. But he said something that transcends Middle East politics, and I'd like to just share that quote with you from last night, and I encourage those who are watching to take a look at the full recording of The Daily Show of his appearance. But he said, I think in the last 25 years, ever since the end of the Cold War, we haven't figured out what this world is all about and what our place and role in it is. We just keep stumbling through and stumbling into many of these armed conflicts, actually making the situation worse. What we've inherited today is largely because we've intervened in places without a strategy of what we needed to do if we needed to do anything at all, which probably is sound strategic judgment of America's role in the world and how we deal with some of these conflicts. Clearly, we cannot be the world's policeman. The world's problems just transcend our ability to send blood and treasure to the many corners of the world where there are problems. There are certain situations, and I think President Obama addressed the question of why we were getting involved again in Iraq. First of all, to protect American interests. There were American diplomats and military personnel in Erbil when he ordered strikes against ISIS in the north. And he I think, has repeated from time to time that we would get involved in these conflicts when humanitarian interest dictated it, and we were in a position to do something. That touches back on something you raised, Dick, about the Ebola virus and the horrible news yesterday that as many as 1.4 million people in Africa could be infected by January. And the U.S. has taken a leadership role. And as everyone on the panel has suggested, is that we can't go it alone. We need the international community, and a lot of the bringing along the international community involves developing coalitions. We can't have coalitions if we don't play nice with the neighbors, and we need to develop these coalitions through sound foreign policy, and that originates in Foggy Bottom. So Dick, I'm going to toss it back to you and ask as we start our second round, and remind our audience that we're looking forward in a few minutes to fielding their questions, and please start sending those into the queue on your control panel. We will compile the questions for our panelists today on America's role in the world. But Dick, let's just take a look at America's statecraft. What you see as America's lead in diplomacy around the world, and I'll note again that President Obama is at the UN this week. He's going to give another address at the UN Security Council, where America, the United States, is the president of the Security Council. So he will address specifically questions of national security, but his speech this morning was on broader topics, and Angela will get back to some of what he said relative to Russia. But Dick, can you sort of add on to your perspective from the State Department of America's role in the world?
Well, from the State Department perspective, I have long wished, hoped, dreamed that Congress would finally get it right and adequately fund and build a State Department that could do the job that's needed to be done around the world. The U.S. Foreign Service is an incredibly dedicated group of men and women who are highly capable and highly educated and represent our country with dignity and sagacity, but it's too small. Our military side of our strategic defense international affairs arena gets about 99% of the money. State Department is probably less than 1%. Americans have a woefully misshapen idea of foreign aid and what it's for and how much of it goes out of our pockets. We are not giving away, vast amounts of our budget. Again, it's less than 1%. My sense is that for most Americans, if you ask them, they would say the United States military is our first line of defense. My view is the United States Diplomatic Service is our first line of defense, and when it does not do its job properly, then you need to bring in the guys who can knock down the doors and blow up the buildings. The Defense Department has been woefully overfunded for years. And that's not, I'm not picking a fight with you, Patrick, because I know you were on that side of the fence. But we need a balanced approach, and soft power as well as hard power. I think many in Congress don't understand that, and Congress as an institution has changed mightily. At the end of the Second World War and after, for that decade of the 60s, most of the members of Congress had had some experience in the military. Congress this time around, I think there are less than a dozen members of Congress that have been in the military. Understanding how that whole process works and what's needed and how you go about engaging the world is something that people simply don't understand. I think John Kerry is doing a great job. I think Hillary Clinton did a good job, and if I were to give President Obama a report card on his foreign affairs course, or a grade on that, I'd probably give him a B. He's stumbled a couple of times, and I think it's basically because of inexperience. You don't draw a red line unless you really mean you got a red line. And that's something he's going to have to live with as he goes on in history. Let me just leave it there, and if you've got any questions, come back at me. But I think that it is the mixture between soft power and hard power and economic power and citizen power. The U.S. citizens are the base of this foreign policy of ours. And back to Angela's point, getting along in the world is like getting along with your neighbors. You've got to behave properly. You be nice to people. You help them when they need things. And you also don't let them put their trash in your yard. So it's a two-way street here. Okay.
Sort of the Mr. Rogers approach to foreign policy.
There you go. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood here. But
Angela,
not necessarily in Iraq, I guess.
There's a new approach to a new teaching aid, Mr. Rogers in the neighborhood. Angela, let's peel back the onion a little bit on Mr. Putin. Clearly, before ISIS, well, I think back and forth, Ukraine seems to be another whack-a-mole. It pops up and then subsides, and something else takes the Americans' interest in international affairs, which admittedly is a troublesome question to keep the American public engaged in foreign affairs. But let's examine a little bit from your perspective. What's going on with Russia?
Well, there's a lot going on with Russia, and not all of it certainly to our liking. There are a lot of comments that President Putin is an irrational actor, and so how do we deal with a person who's essentially off his rocker and therefore not somebody we can a good neighbor? We can't reason with this neighbor because he's not reasonable, and that's not true. He has an audience, and his audience is the people of his country, and he addresses his audience very effectively, very rationally, and he is looking out for the interests of his country. Those interests of Russia are not the interests that we would like Russia to have or believe that they should have. But the reality is, Russia's behaving in its neighborhood, in its immediate neighborhood, much the same way that we would behave in our neighborhood. And, just take Cuba and the United States as an example of how we protect our neighborhood, if you want to look at why Russia is so engaged in Ukraine. There's a whole dissertation to be made on missed opportunities with Russia. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the 1990s, we were really reluctant to embrace the idea of the end of the Cold War. It was easier, it was more comforting to have this East-West, a simpler foreign policy time. That hasn't been the case since the Soviet Union collapsed, and there were 15 new independent countries, and then the whole Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe split up, and so we've created a hydra with lots of heads, and European Union and the United States tried to corral some of those forces with expanding the EU and expanding NATO, but that has been for Russia, and even Yeltsin, but less effectively because Yeltsin was less effective in general. But Putin's been around a long time and potentially could continue to be around for a long time. And he has consistently said the expansion of NATO in particular, but to a lesser extent the expansion of the EU, has been his greatest foreign policy threat. And we're not respecting that. And so some of the situation between Russia and the United States, the tension is our own making. On the other hand, Russia has in fact violated a number of treaties that they agreed to, not the least of which were the treaties that they negotiated with the 15 republics of the Soviet Union when they split up, such as the ownership of Crimea that they've rescinded now by annexing Crimea through a vote. So, but the question of you raised earlier, NATO partners, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria even. These all are former Soviet bloc states that feel, especially Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, that they could be threatened by a Russian invasion. And I think their membership in NATO precludes that. I think their fears are overstated. And I think we in the United States should not be focusing on those fears. But the real fear of what will happen to Ukraine is there. On the other hand, they're not a member of the EU. They're not a member of NATO. They had professed, the non-partisan position. They didn't belong to NATO. They didn't join any military faction, if you will. So what do we do about Ukraine? And I'm not sure there's much we can do about Ukraine except let Ukraine and Russia work it out.
They didn't have much success.
Are probably as far as we can go.
They didn't have much success being the Switzerland of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, no. But, the whack-a-mole description is very, very an apt description because, they have in turn been pro-EU, pro-US, but then they switch back and are strongly pro-Russia, and then there'll be another opportunity and they switch and they're looking more toward the West again, and then Russia will offer a lot of money or cut off their gas and oil pipelines, and then they switch back to Russia. Ukraine is not a stable ally, and they're certainly not the Switzerland of Eastern Europe. So they've got a lot of difficulties to work out on their own before either Russia or the West would consider them a stable partner. So.
Well, with my background as a Middle East analyst, whack-a-mole is a pretty good description to keep on one's shirt sleeve. Can you talk a little bit about you talked about the Baltic states and others in NATO. The United States has obviously given a guarantee through NATO that we would provide for their defense. But as we've seen in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, the Russian modus operandi has not been a direct invasion, although some people talk about Russian troops in eastern Ukraine. Can you talk a little bit about the threat from subversion? Some of these countries have large Russian populations, as does eastern Ukraine. Are they concerned that that this won't be the tanks coming through the Fulda Gap? To recall for Ambassador Bowers his time at
I think your audience out there, Patrick, may not understand that alliteration there, the Fulda Gap and the German and these all that kind of stuff. Anyway, it's
back
good.
in history, the Soviet, the Russian threat to Western Europe. But
right.
Can you talk a little bit about the security guarantees and what is on the table in terms of the relationship between these former Warsaw Pact, former Soviet satellite countries, and now Western Europe and the NATO alliance?
The security guarantees, as you mentioned, the fifth article, Article 5 of the NATO agreement. So the full members of NATO, which surrounding the former Soviet Union, include Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which were part of the Soviet Union, but then other neighbors like Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria. You can throw in Hungary and the Czech Republic, although they're not right next to former Soviet states. But, so they're full members. So should Russia invade them, there are a couple of loopholes. As members of NATO, they have certain financial obligations to support their own military structures so that they have a sufficient military to defend themselves on the first stage, but they also need to contribute to the greater NATO forces. And some of those states, in particular the Baltic states, were a bit lax on those funds. And so in the last 6-8 months, they've really scrambled to fulfill their financial agreements with NATO in the event that they are invaded so that they can call upon Article 5 and hopefully get NATO support. But Ukraine is not one of those NATO partners. Now, in the 1990s, when NATO first began its expansion, it also had a program called Partners in Peace. And it was sort of a program that was designed to pacify the former Soviet Union, in particular Russia, that we weren't really trying to, take over their sphere of influence, because Russia and Ukraine and others were all part of this partners in peace. When Putin came to power, he didn't buy that. that was not a deep enough justification for the continued expansion of full partners in NATO. So Putin has, already since 2000, the first decade of the 2000s, during his first 2 terms, complained about the full partners of NATO. When NATO talked about adding Ukraine and Georgia as full partners, Russia really got antsy about it, and of course in 2008 they demonstrated that Georgia's still in their sphere of influence, and they went into Georgia, and we know how that turned out. NATO didn't intervene on behalf of Georgia. We let it work itself out. There are other NATO issues that, it's no guarantee that even if, let's say, Russia invades Estonia tomorrow, there's no guarantee that NATO would necessarily come to their defense. Presumably they would, but there's no guarantee necessarily. Turkey is threatened by ISIL now, and Turkey's not even part of the coalition. So when you talk about the Middle East, Turkey's a member of NATO, but we're not talking about sending troops to help Turkey against this terrorist threat. So NATO isn't necessarily the salvation of all. And I forgot your question. I started launching into that.
No, I wanted to pull the NATO string a little bit, and I think you've tackled that well. We're going to shift gears here a little bit, and again remind the audience that this is Global Focus, a production of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. You can find out more information about the Tennessee World Affairs Council on the web at www.tnwac.org. And we have our first question from David Hillick, who is a history teacher at the Randolph School in Huntsville, or as we fondly call it here at the Tennessee World Affairs Council, Lower Tennessee. So thanks to David and his class for being lower, not lesser, but just more southern Tennessee, that is. David forwards a question from his class. Is it reasonable for the United States to try to prioritize regional security matters along the lines of the Obama administration's pivot to Asia, or is it impossible to predict with certainty where our power and influence will need to be applied over the long term? And Susan, I'll turn to you as our China specialist. The pivot to Asia, the rebalancing, what does that mean for U.S. foreign policy? I think some may see that it's been kind of a weak-kneed effort so far, especially given our inability to extract a lot of our attention from the Middle East.
Correct. Well, thank you, Pat, for the introduction and for the question. I've been steeped a lot in reading Chinese news over the past 3 years, especially with the dissertation, so there's a lot of perspective I can bring in as far as China's perspective to the quote-unquote pivot and then what that means. I think already we are witnessing what could be perceived as a fundamental U.S. foreign policy failure with the pivot. And I even pause in regards to calling it a pivot because it's really not a return to Asia as much as it is just increased attention. The U.S. was already always there, and that's kind of how China sees it, as far as even just the terminology seems to be off-putting to many Chinese because of the exact words of pivot. But with that said, let me say that I believe that the U.S. hasn't really been able to successfully unify the ASEAN countries against China, nor has the United States succeeded in its goal in regards to thwarting or pacifying China's territorial ambitions or increasing stability in the South Asia Sea, all of which was kind of one of some of the objectives of the quote-unquote pivot to Asia. And I think that, as Ambassador Bowers has pointed out, China is more aggressive now in its territorial expansion than it ever has been, and that has been after the quote-unquote pivot. And really, while the United States is wanting to balance China without containing it, at the same time it's making military agreements and diplomatic agreements with countries around China's periphery. So even if rhetorically it's not endorsing containment, I think in practicality it looks that way. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I think that fundamentally the policy, as you were saying, is, if not fundamentally flawed, it's not going as planned. And if anything, while it might not be a direct driver of China's actions, I think it has stimulated some of the aggression that we're seeing now in regards to counterbalancing the America's balance of China.
Well, you've given us the granularity about the the extent of the effectiveness of the pivot. Dick, let me ask you to look at it from perhaps the strategic view, and David's question about prioritizing regional security matters and the use of the pivot as an example. Is it impossible to predict with certainty, as he asked, where our power and influence will need to be applied over the long term? As a foreign policy practitioner, how do you view the assessment of looking down the road of where American interests lie and where our soft power, as you put it, needs to be applied down the road?
Before I get to that, Patrick, let me just comment, if I may, on Susan's. I mean, I fundamentally agree with you, but I think it's important to realize that the United States has been a Pacific power for several hundred years. And Perry going off to China in, 1848, I guess. And we have relationships in China. We fought relationships in Asia. We fought a war in Korea. We fought a war against Japan. We have military bases that have been there for decades and decades. And the pivot, I think, was pushed more by the media than it was in reality in the foreign affairs arena. China can look at it as it will, but I think the other point I'd like to make is that the countries on the periphery of China are being more fearful of China. They are concerned about where is China going, what does it mean for us, what does it mean for our place in the world. Interesting, India is now really working much more closely with Japan. And the Prime Minister of India went to Japan. They had some meetings. I think some agreements will come out of that. But that said, let me go back to, what does the United States do? I think we have core strategic interests around the world, and it is focused primarily on Europe throughout our history, also in Asia, and also in Latin America. It's geographical sense, I mean, it seems to me. Where you have the biggest problems is where you put the focus, but it's where your economy is tied, it's where your friends are, we have cultural affinities with other people. So I don't think that we should be reactive. We have these long-term core interests. What kind of a world do we want to build? Who are our friends? I think we need to be much more prudent in standing for our values, but not trying to impose them on others. Exporting democracy to people that are not ready for it is foolish. And I think we learned that lesson in Iraq, and hopefully it will stay around for a while. So I hope the folks in Alabama, I applaud you for being with us, and for you students out there, stay engaged. Read The Economist magazine. Watch the news. I have some of my friends here in Nashville, when they ask me what I watch, and I say, well, I watch Al Jazeera probably a good deal because I find their reporting interesting. It's a big and busy world out there.
One footnote to that. Unfortunately, when Al Jazeera America debuted, the web feed for Al Jazeera English, which is the overseas broadcast, went away. So it's increasingly difficult. But I second the notion to get engaged with a steady reading and watching level of interest in international affairs. The Economist is probably the best publication on the planet in terms of keeping people abreast with what's going on. But obviously there's no shortage of authoritative, insightful, free reading on the web that can be had.
And there's also a lot of junk out there. So you have to discern a little bit.
Yes, that is certainly true. And I'll do a little self-promotion of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, the programs and resources that we have on the website, and our programs that we put on around the state, and especially here in Nashville at Belmont University. I would encourage everyone who's watching to get on our mailing list. Go to TNWAC.org, the big blue subscribe button there. That will keep you abreast of what's happening. We do have a Twitter account, so you can follow us on Twitter at TNWAC. And we continually post news items and resources that can be of interest to you. For example, just the other day, we talked about the Chicago study about Americans' interest in foreign policy. So that's up on our website, as well as remarks from President Obama at West Point and those sorts of things. So check out tnwac.org. Our next question comes from Sarah Harbaugh, and it's about Turkey. And Angela, I'm going to ask you to help me with this a little bit. I'll take the first piece of it. And the question from Sarah is, what is the underlying cause of Turkey's reluctance to send ground troops in an axis with the United States airstrikes, given the continual northward progress and imminent threat posed by ISIS? And we've seen in the news this week that there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of refugees from Syria moving across the Turkish border. The air campaign into Syria has highlighted the fact that Turkey is a reluctant partner in the coalition. The Turkish foreign minister was in Jeddah last week when Secretary Kerry met with the Arab partners, which concluded what by any measure is an impressive collection of Sunni Arab states involved in the campaign against ISIS. There are a lot of moving pieces in the Middle East, and Dick, you talked about The Economist, and I'm going to make a stab at a little technology here of trying to share with our audience this Economist piece, and it's basically talking about the different entities involved in the ISIS campaign. And on one side, you can see governments and groups, Kurds, militias, and the only box that has everyone indicating an unfriendly attitude is the Islamic State. All the others are mixed reviews. The United States is not loved or mistrusted or friendly or unfriendly to every entity there. So that is just sort of a visual representation of how complicated the situation is for this or that party to go along with the policies and campaigns of other partners. In the case of Turkey, there was in the news the 40-plus diplomats and families who were held by ISIS. They've been released, and we don't know what the terms of their release were, whether there was some quid pro quo that Turkey would remain outside the coalition that was about to punish ISIS that we've seen in the last couple of days. So Turkey is an interesting problem. It's a NATO ally, so we have a treaty relationship with it. We have a half a century of military coordination and cooperation with Turkey as a NATO partner. You may recall that during the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the major campaign planning in the United States to invade Iraq included a component that went in from Turkey, and towards the last minute of the planning, Turkey withdrew support. So there had to be a lot of changes on the ground for military planners in the United States to go in, not from an axis that included northern Iraq against the Saddam Hussein regime. Turkey is ascendant in its role as a leading voice in the Muslim world. It's not an Arab state, but it is an Islamic country. It's in the Organization of the Islamic Conference. It has very strong relations with its Arab neighbors, and those are complicated by the situation in Israel-Palestine, Syria, Lebanon. It's a tough neighborhood, and they are doing the calculus like anyone else would of where are our best interests. They have a a large Kurdish population in the southeast that has been restive for decades, and they've suffered terrorist strikes and have battled the Kurds within the borders of Turkey. So they've got a different calculation to be made than the United States does, and you can be sure they're under a lot of pressure right now to get involved in the anti-ISIS campaign, notwithstanding those issues that have thus far suggested to them that they shouldn't be involved. And the involvement that people have been talking about so far is the air campaign, not so much the getting involved on the ground in Syria, which would be a totally additional step. So that's my take on Sarah's question about Turkey's reluctance. Angela or Dick or Susan, anybody want to footnote that or add to it?
You know, the only minor footnote I'd add would be Turkey has, for the last couple decades, but certainly under Erdogan, reevaluated its relationship with Europe, because, you know, its application to the EU has, you know, permanently been on hold for how many decades, and Erdogan's begun a campaign of maybe Turkey doesn't need the EU. Maybe it needs to look more at its neighbors and emerge as a regional power. So I think that's part of it. But I think all the other things you mentioned, the Kurdish situation in Turkey makes it sensitive for them to participate, because helping the Kurds in Iraq against ISIL potentially builds up the Kurds in Turkey, which could then provoke the PKK to take stronger actions later or even concurrently. So I think that's a major factor for the Turks, and this is on their backside. This is their neighbor, direct neighbor. So they have to be very careful, because the fight literally can come into their territory. You know, not you know, we worry about somebody boarding a plane and coming to the United States. All they got to do is walk across the border and they're in Turkey. So Turkey has to be very careful. But I would argue that they're a whole lot less keen on you know, their NATO/European alliance than they used to be, than ever in the last 50 years. So
thanks for that. I think we're quickly approaching the end of our hour. These always pick up steam, and before we know it, we're at the end. So I'm going to ask to go around the horn one time, and final thoughts on America's role in the world, U.S. foreign policy, what you see as challenges, and what Americans should be thinking about. And before I do that, I'll just remind everyone this is Global Focus, provided to you by the Tennessee World Affairs Council, and we appreciate the participation of our Peoria World Affairs Council colleague Angela Weck today, and we've also had with us from the Board of Directors of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, Susan Haynes and Ambassador Dick Bowers. Susan, why don't you kick us off with your final thoughts?
Okay. I want to thank everybody for participating and all of the people that are signing in. I think that actually speaks to what I think is a good closing remark, which is that I don't see enough Americans caring and engaging in world affairs. As Angela had mentioned, it's not foreign policy, really is domestic policy. And perhaps I'm preaching to the choir, because you guys are the ones that are listening to this. But I would encourage increased engagement and awareness, because citizens do have power, and there is efficacy in the vote and in individual action and in involvement. And I think that you know, we do live in a democracy, so our activities as a nation abroad are impacted by the citizenry here at home. And if you are scared about what you're seeing, if you are anxious about particular things, or you're wanting things to go in different directions, know that these decisions that are being made, while seemingly distanced from the average citizen, from the average American, and us sitting here in Tennessee or Kentucky, we do have a say by voting and by getting involved. And I think that just as a last comment against the skepticism and the cynicism and some of the apathy that seems to characterize a lot of people in younger generations, I think that I would speak against that and speak to the fact that the more that you learn, the more that you get involved, the more that you will see the impact of the individual on the international stage.
Angela, our guest from Peoria, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't say any better. Get involved, read everything, prepare for your future as an active citizen in the United States, but also don't necessarily believe everything you read. Ask questions. So challenge, learn more, and know that the world is a complicated place, but that the United States has a very good role in it, and with your continued involvement, our all continued involvement, will continue to have a strong presence. So.
Thanks again. Dick?
Ditto all the above. I mean, and ditto also, I'd like to say that we need a wonderful, capacity-filled foreign service. People in school today are the ones who are going to be the diplomats tomorrow. So look at careers in the foreign affairs arena, or the military, or the intelligence services. We need the best team on the field that we can get. So come be part of it. And thank you, Patrick, and the Tennessee World Affairs Council for putting on programs like this, which hopefully will broaden the minds of American citizens and get them more engaged in the world.
Well, that says it all, and thanks again to our distinguished panel for taking time today. Good luck, Dr. Haynes, this week, and we'll look forward to seeing you back as PhD. Thanks again to our audience. We bring you these webcasts at least once a month, and as the situation dictates, we'll have special guests and special editions. Again, this is Global Focus from the Tennessee World Affairs Council. We thank everyone for participating today, and please check the website for more information on how you can support, get involved, contribute, join, reflect from, and take advantage of the Tennessee World Affairs Council and what we're bringing to the state of Tennessee. Thanks, and everyone have a good day.
Bye-bye.